Yes, okay, great. So actually we are now starting with our second plenary meeting. And in this plenary, we are glad to have some project presentations. We have heard before about the 4 networks we have in our IRG group. Just to remind to some of you that may not have attended the first plenary, we have 4 networks: the soil carbon sequestration network, the farm to regional scale integration network, the circular food systems network, and the inventories and NDC support network. So we really were glad to see a lot of developments in those networks. But today we would like to introduce some projects which are really large-scale projects. And the first one is led by Cynthia Rosenzweig from Columbia University. And Cynthia is also leading the AgMIP, Agricultural Modeling, Intercomparison and Improvement Initiative. And we will hear from Cynthia about the MACB project, which is on mitigation and adaptation co-benefits. So I hope we don't have too much background noise, but I'm glad to give you the floor, Cynthia.
Thank you, Jean-Francois, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all. I'm going to share my screen. There, can you see it? Good. Yes, so as Jean-Francois said in his introduction, I'd like to share today about a new project associated with the partnership of the Global Research Alliance and the Agricultural Model Intercomparison and Improvement Project, which is known as AgMIP. There's really growing attention now to be looking in an integrated way across climate change action and the Sustainable Development Goals, in particular around agriculture for number 2, zero hunger. So policymakers, stakeholders, and researchers are beginning to look at interventions that contribute to both mitigation and adaptation. What are the co-benefits of interventions in regard to both of these major climate change responses? But are there trade-offs? Are there synergies between the two? And these are examples of these interventions are, for example, of course, soil carbon sequestration, sustainable intensification, improved crop and livestock systems. So with a working group that we've been forming with the members of the IRG, we are developing a framework and a set of protocols for conducting studies that consider both mitigation and adaptation, both separately and together. This is the working framework that has been developed by this group. First, what was it really emphasized yesterday in the network presentations and the projects is the stakeholder engagement. Rather than have the researchers just jump in and do whatever they think is right, now really best practice is to always engage with stakeholders to develop these kinds of integrated assessment projects. So we start with stakeholder engagement. One of the things that the methodology involves is with the stakeholders creating what in AgMIP we call representative agricultural pathways. These are narratives of any regional farming system, and it can be also, we do them, AgMIP also conducts national RAP processes as well, to see what are the alternate visions or storylines for development of the farming systems in the region or country. Then, of course, we have to have our climate scenarios. And now, for the first time in the gray box, we are looking not just at one or the other of emissions and mitigation models on one side and impacts and adaptation models on the other side, but we are really considering and to have simulations that consider both. And then we look at the linkages between the biophysical processes and the socioeconomic processes between the interventions that are tested across the two modeling spaces. And the results then are explicit solution spaces around what are the synergies, what are the trade-offs, what are the co-benefits of, for example, soil carbon sequestration, to give an example. Just as we start with stakeholder engagement, the work ends with contributing to the evidence space for governments to create their policies and programs. Now, you see on the left-hand side, of course, the very, very key elements that also need to be considered now in basically any project that we do in farming systems. What are the gender aspects? What is the linked to nutrition of these different interventions, and all of that leading to the entire set of activities. How does this really impact food security for the region and nation? A key part of the MACB project and protocol and framework is capacity building. That MACB aims to increase in-country capacity to co-develop information products of value to stakeholders. And you can see that the photos are from AgMIP projects in which we do this. What does this involve? It involves continuous relationships, basically, of training, experiences, sharing, learning back and forth, learning what works, what doesn't work. Not only in the modeling side, but as we're learning more and more that we also need best practices for stakeholder engagement. And so this interaction and learning and capacity building is both on the technical modeling side, but also on the interactions with stakeholders as well. So with great thanks to the Australian ACR and the GRA AgMIP partnership, there is now a seed project that is getting going right as we speak in Bangladesh for MACB. I don't want to take too much time, but just to show that these are the objectives: to integrate the stakeholder feedback, evaluate effects of interventions in the current farming systems, right? What's happening? How will these interventions help with the farming systems right now? But also then examine the effects of the interventions on measures of benefits under future climate scenarios as well. All of this is to support policy development, to communicate with not just at the end, but beginning, middle, and end of the project. And finally, to strengthen capacity in all partners in using and applying these GRA AgMIP MACB methods. I'm going to go into a little bit of the nitty-gritty on this. So here's some of the models and output variables. Greenhouse gas emissions, we're using the DNDC model. By the way, for Bangladesh, we're looking at sustainable rice systems. DNDC model, looking at N2O, CO2, and CH4 fluxes. We're using the ORISA and APSIM models. In AgMIP, it's a multi-model approach to give it basically improve the rigor of the science and the understanding the explicit model uncertainty of the results. So we're going to use ARISA and APSIM, and of course get yield per hectare, still very important outcome. Just the same though, we need to look at the stability for the farmers, the stability of the yields year to year as well. And so we'll use the CV for crop model outputs. But from the beginning of AgMIP, we always look at both biophysical and economic results in an interactive way. So we use the TOAMD model for regional farming systems to look at what are the costs and benefits of the aspects of production, and that contribute most strongly to greenhouse gases in terms of nitrogen management, water management, and we always bring the economic results in as well, and look at outcomes in regard to farmer income and for example percent poverty. And this can be done for different groups of farmers within the farming. This is done for different groups of farmers within a farming region. Of course, data, all modeling needs data, but I also submit data needs models to be useful. So we're working with the Bangladesh Met Office and Bureau of Statistics and BIRI, the Bangladesh Rice Research Institute, to get the climate information, economic data, crop practice data that are needed to run these models. Now, again, here we are to show that this is actually what goes into, I'm not going to go into detail here, but you can see what we're really doing is bringing ARISA, which has been used for adaptation, the model, one of the main rice models that's used for the impacts of climate change on rice production and all the things that it does within that model. And you can see that what really MACB is doing is then linking this to the DNDC soil module, which does the mineralization, nitrification, etc., for the greenhouse gas fluxes. So we create with the model an interface module, and Tao Li has this has already been done and is being tested in some work in Vietnam, and also beginning to be tested in India. And Bangladesh will be the first GRA AgMIP project MACB testing this. And you see, this is to demystify, and I think a lot of the people understand modeling on this call. You have the models, which have representations of crops, management, soils, weather at different, and this can be done at different scales. We design a set of simulations that test the interventions. For example, alternate wetting and drying, for example, is one of the management interventions that can be tested, and then look at link with the economic aspects of the costs and the use of those interventions, conduct the set of simulations on those interventions with and without for baseline climate and climate change. And then we get in the orange box, the intervention, the outcomes, the outputs and the outcomes. What are the greenhouse gas emissions from the intervention? What are the effects on adaptation that lead to, and the real outcome on food security, yield stability, and farmer livelihoods? And then this can then be used as evidence-based. These results can then be used as evidence-based for which policies make the most sense for a country, for a region and a country. What are the co-benefits for farmers and development of mitigation and adaptation? As Jean-Francois said, that we are in discussion now with GRA colleagues to develop a multi-country MACB program to expand this kind of project to additional GRA countries, and working together create a set of protocols that can be used and modified, of course, for each country context. We will do this with very, very strong national stakeholder and policy engagement so that this can be truly useful. And very importantly, as we are doing in Bangladesh, we are linking with the other GRA research groups, because as I listened to their network reports yesterday, I saw there's so many interactions that we can build on. So we very much look forward to engaging with the other networks on the MACB program. We're engaging in some scoping discussions with in all geographies around the world, in the Caribbean, in Latin America, in Asia, which, as I said, some work has already been getting going, but we want to go further there to perhaps to expand the country set and work with other countries, and then in Africa as well. Right now we're in discussion with colleagues in Zimbabwe. So this is finally coming to the end. We are bringing all this work together in a special issue, and we are inviting anyone on from the GRA to submit a paper. And it's being guest edited by Sonali McDermott and Roberto Valdivia. These are two of the AgMIP scientists who are really leading the MACB projects in Bangladesh, and so we encourage submissions for on any aspect of looking at the co-benefits and trade-offs to food security from mitigation and adaptation considered together. So with that, check out the AgMIP website, and look forward to questions and discussion with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. I think we now really see all the potential of this approach, and what you have kick-started with Bangladesh has so much potential in almost all world regions. So I think that's really a great achievement. And I'm glad also to see that we have two communities which traditionally were not really well connected that now work together. And that's really the way forward. So thank you so much. I guess we may have some questions. Just checking. Oh yeah, you have a question, Cynthia, from Ashraf, maybe explaining with whom you collaborate
yes.
in Bangladesh.
Yes, thank you so much. And yes, wonderful to interact with Bangladesh colleagues. The way that MACB works is to form a team. So it's not just only one collaborator. There's a collaborator, as I showed it just in the data. We are working with the Bangladesh Rice Research Institute. We are working with the Bangladesh Met Office. We are working with RDA. That's where our economist colleague is coming from. And then the agricultural research organization as well. We are also working with colleagues at CIMMIT, so that it's a combination of in-country organizations and CG. So thank you, but I would love to interact and follow up and interact with you. And Pete is saying, sorry, yes, please go on.
Cynthia, can I ask one thing more? So have you decided about your project, and it will be run in Bangladesh from what time?
It is just getting going now, and it will start probably in about a month or two with a scoping workshop to invite all people all groups and modelers and data people and GRA colleagues who are working on anything having to do with mitigation and adaptation in Bangladesh, so that we really get the lay of the land and together plan to see how this project can contribute to the great work that's already there. But it will be run on, it's going to be run on the ground in Bangladesh.
Okay.
Great, thank you. Maybe Pete, you had oh, sorry. I suggest you further interact by chat or by mail, Ashraf, if you like. Thank you. And maybe
we can chat, and by mail we can communicate.
Wonderful, thank you. Look forward to it. And Pete, we're going to invite you to present at the scoping workshop.
Yeah, exactly. Excellent, excellent. And all colleagues, please, for the breakouts, think about the potential of this approach presented by Cynthia. I think we need to go back to this a bit after. I'm now in a sort of a difficult position because I'm chairing, but I should present. So maybe can I ask you, Pamela, for your help, and could you chair this bit of the session? Thank you so much. Well, let me possibly share my screen, and I will introduce a project that we have on soil carbon, which relates to the soil carbon network of the IRG. And some of you were yesterday in the first plenary session, and Pete provided some background and explanations about this CIRCASA project, which is preparing an international research consortium on soil carbon that is on the web program of the Horizon Europe call of the European Commission. So what I will do now is try to explain why we think this is important and how we see the development of such a consortium. So first of all, there are many initiatives around that are developing the concept of storing carbon in agricultural soils and preserving carbon where the stocks are high, like in the peatlands, wetlands, or in the forests. The FAO, with support of the Global Environment Fund and linked to the UNCCD, develops the recarbonizing soils, which is aiming at globally storing carbon in soils. And this is connected also with other efforts of FAO to understand the potential for soil carbon storage. We are also in a policy process where in the climate negotiations, and I think we will hear more about this in COP26 in Glasgow, there is a Coronivia process on agriculture, which devoted a full workshop on understanding potential barriers and opportunities for soil carbon. This was a very interesting session because we had negotiators from all countries talking directly with scientists and stakeholders. We can see a number of private sector initiatives. I would say that most agri-food businesses are now interested by this issue. Certainly the large agri-food corporates are extremely interested. And you need to develop this, and we heard earlier today, for instance, from Lee in Australia, the need to develop some certification schemes, some reporting and verification schemes. So this is developing in many countries. For instance, for France, we have a national low carbon label, which attracts a lot of interest from industries. It is also that the European Union is developing a large mission on restoring soil health in connection with food systems. And the plan is also to increase soil organic carbon stocks. And this contributes to the European Green Deal strategies. So you see there is a lot of interest worldwide, and these are just a few examples, there are far more. So what we have been developing, and going back to the talk by Pete yesterday, it was explained, we developed a strategic research agenda by understanding the knowledge needs from stakeholders and what are the research gaps, what is needed for further research. So we came up with a consensus across partners, and remember there are partners from all continents in this project, with 4 pillars. This is a strategic agenda with 4 pillars. So pillar 1 is still on the knowledge gaps. What is missing in terms of research to unlock the potential of soil carbon? So here we see as a need to develop research goals, international research goals that could be, for instance, in Europe with the EGP soil, but there are many other programs and projects and funding agencies that are interested. The second pillar is about the monitoring, reporting, verification. We heard earlier in this meeting that you need this, you need to have robust method that come with a low cost. And so that's our view, is that we need to create an international standard. The third one is about agroecological and technological innovations. How would you combine those through private-public partnerships? And the last one is how would you bring that knowledge to the users, to the farmers? How would you co-design locally the options? And there we see potential for collaborative platforms online, but also for some digital tools like web apps and so on. So let me explain a bit more in details each of those pillars. Pillar 1, here our customers, if I may say, are the national research agencies, plus the research organizations and universities. We want to create research goals on key priorities that have been delineated in the strategic research agenda, and I will not read through, but they are on the slide as examples. There are a few more. And obviously, we would like to have in those international calls a review panel, and this would then lead to projects with teams possibly from a number of different countries working together to solve some of those issues. So we expect to have the next goal in 2022, and we will organize it with several national research agencies. And this goes back for pillar 2 to the vision provided in a paper in Global Change Biology by Pete and others, where we see that you need a number of different data. I don't want to read out everything here, but just to have a robust monitoring, reporting, and verification of the change in soil organic carbon stocks. You need to combine remote sensing, to combine soil data, agricultural practices data, the climate data, modeling, and you need to benchmark everything with short-term and long-term experiments. So obviously, this is really an undertaking to do this, and we need to develop it. In pillar 2, our customers would be the space agencies. We see a lot of potential and a lot of interest of, say, ESA, European Space Agency, NASA Harvest, Copernicus, and others to work together with the soil people, like we have ISRIC, which assembles all the soil data for the Global Soil Partnership, but also with the agricultural data, long-term field experiments. So we are looking into developing this with a design study. So we would like to just have a sort of a mock-up of how this would work. And then we would collect funds to have 2 implementation stages. And we can expect to have a sort of a private-public consortium there. So that's the plan. In pillar 3, it's really about public-private partnerships for innovation. One of the roadblocks, if you want to improve your soil carbon stocks in arable systems, is to get some deep-rooted crops, maybe to increase the share of perennial crops or the share of cover crops. And so there you can get attention of breeders and get breeders to develop such things if there is funding and if there are some in a foreseeable future, some markets for this. In the same way, if you want to change things in agriculture, you need to change the machinery. So there is interest from some machinery companies and this is in line with precision and digital agriculture. Moreover, we need to work on the many options for organic fertilizers, for biochar, digestates, and so on. And here again, there are some businesses that are quite interested, as well as some research labs and some funding agencies that fund innovation. And certainly, these are just technologies, but they need to be embedded in a broader vision of the role of nature-based solutions of agroecological options for soil carbon. And that's certainly something we would like to work out further also. Then in the fourth and last pillar, it's really about how would that knowledge become useful? How would those technologies help really what's happening on the ground? And our understanding is that we need to co-design with local users, local options, very much in line with what you said, Cynthia, working with the stakeholders since the start. That's why we need to have regional networks. And in the IRC, we will get a number of regional networks to help. And they would engage with the stakeholders, and they would co-design how the options can be developed. Also, there may be some crowdsourcing of knowledge, and we need to work in the local languages and with the cultural diversity. One example of a sort of early pilot of a platform that brings knowledge together and brings users and researchers together is this open collaborative platform of the CIRCASA project. You can connect to it. It is a repository of data on the one hand with a strong dataverse system for as a repository. It has geospatial layers showing the results of modeling or the results of soil data with high resolution products like the ISRIC product. But moreover, it is a bit like a social media. You have a community in this platform with profiles for the researchers, for the stakeholders, and they can connect online, exchange data, information, options, and so on. So we hope to further develop such concepts, also link it to web apps so you can download all this conveniently. Well, this may sound a bit like a dream, but maybe it can become a reality. And for this, you need funding, but you also need a governance of the International Research Consortium. So we worked out these options for funding and governance in the final conference, where we had a large number of participants. We had high-level talks from the European Commission, from the head of the board of the Soil Health and Food Mission, but also from a number of key experts, both from the public and private sector, and from the international scene, like the FAO and the GRA, but also the 4/1000 initiative. So it is interesting to see that we had some imbalance, I must say, in terms of regions, Europe being much stronger than others. But most participants were expressing interest to participate in the IRC with, I should say, not exactly full balance across pillars, more interest on pillars 1 and 2, a bit less on pillars 3 and 4, possibly because we had more research and academia than other stakeholders in that meeting. Well, we got, however, a large number of letters of interest by pillar, see this, and this interest is, I would say, distributed across world regions. So having this in mind, we are preparing now this International Research Consortium. It will be through a new coordination and support action that will be funded by the European Commission. Its goal is to align the research and innovation activities and to avoid duplication. We can say that no single country and no single corporate can develop alone all that research and innovation at scale. And I think that we see that we need highly interdisciplinary research that is guided by stakeholders' demands, and this really requires a dedicated tool. So generally speaking, we want to bring together in the IRC research, private sector, public sector, with many constituencies that are listed to the right. And this is to work on the 4 pillars to provide coordination, capacity building, collaborative knowledge, and this needs to happen through a governance of the IRC. So our preliminary vision of that governance is that we need a steering committee with representatives of the main stakeholder categories, representatives of the regional networks, of international organization, of European Commission, and they may meet, let's say, twice a year. They would be supported by a scientific advisory board, and they would be elected, for some of the members at least, from the General Assembly with all the members. Then we will have an executive board. Obviously, you need to have dedicated leaders that are expert scientists, that may be also experts from agencies, and they need to drive the process and drive the work on the 4 pillars. So then you have the working groups in each pillar, and then you have the regional networks, and all this needs to be supported by a strong secretariat that will be funded initially by the call from the European Commission. So I will not detail this, as this is for your reference. These are the rules of the different bodies. And yes, it's nothing very new, I think, the way some of those international programs are working. So thank you for your attention, and happy to answer any question. And please be in touch if you are interested. We would be most happy to provide you with further information, and please contact me directly if you have some interest for this process. Thanks. Pamela, I think you raise your hand. Thank you.
Good morning. I had to step out there and back in. My Zoom was not cooperating either. What time period, I'm just thinking for our members here and whatnot, what time period are you envisioning the IRC to function? You know, how many years? And then are there ways still for them to reach back, or for their countries to participate in this in different ways?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Pamela. So you see, this project will be submitted to Horizon 2020 as a coordination and support action in October of this year. So hoping it will be successful. This is a competitive process, so we will be providing a proposal. Maybe some others will provide a proposal, let's see. But it should be one proposal selected, and in this way the IRC Secretariat will be funded. It is important to note that this call is asking for not only agricultural soil carbon, but also to consider some other land use types, possibly also the role of land use change. So the strategic research agenda of the CIRCASA project was for only agricultural lands. So we will have to design an expanded, if I may say, agenda to cover these other land use types. And this may take us between 6 months and 1 year. So we expect the launch of the IRC to be, you see, more in 2023 than in 2022, although it could be still in sometimes a second semester of 2022. So that's about the timeline. The duration, this could be at least 3 to 4 years, but if successful, we would expect it to last even longer. I'm not sure we will solve all the issues in 3 to 4 years. Thanks. Maybe Yelto, to you.
Yeah, thanks also from my side. I have a question which, on the one hand, I fully recognize the big political interest and also commercial interest in this whole topic of sea storage in agricultural soils. On the other hand, I have been in touch with our experts from the Thunen Institute, and their research data suggests that the possibilities through changing tillage systems to increase CO2 storage in the soils suggest that this is a very, very limited potential. Is that part of your research designed to shed more light on this topic?
Yes, thank you, Yalto. I think that's fairly well accepted in the international literature that in many circumstances, if you only shift from tillage to no-till, you will not get a lot more soil carbon. However, there is presumably an interaction with the degree of drought. In droughted soils, sometimes you get better results with no-till. But that's not really the point. The point is that we need to redesign the agricultural systems to get more soil carbon in. And usually what you can see is that the key way to obtain this is to get just more crop residues, to have cover crops, for instance, is very powerful, or possibly to have some grass lays in between the main crops. And such things. There are many, many options. They are really explored worldwide. And certainly we have many examples showing a large increase in soil organic carbon stocks. However, it's important to have mentioned two caveats, which are really important. One is you should not do this while creating more emissions. So, for instance, if you are to over-fertilize to get more carbon, obviously you get more nitrous oxide, and then the balance is not so favorable. Another one is that we know that of the reversibility of those carbon pools, if you go back to the, let's say, initial practices with tillage, with bare soil, you're going to lose gradually your surplus of carbon. So all this comes with many questions. I think if you take a step back, what we aim for is a transformation of the agricultural systems that is not going to only store carbon, but also to help for adaptation to climate change, because you get less bare soil, less erosion, and also, at least in some cases, help for food security, because in the poor soils, if you bring in more organic matter, you get better yields, and that's really important for the future. But I see, Luke, you have questions. Oh, you're muted, Luke.
Sorry, Jean-Francois, I was in the chat and struggling to find the unmute button. Yeah, I mean, I'd support everything that's been said, really, and I think that's a useful perspective from you. Going back to the kind of opening remarks, though, around kind of monitoring, reporting and verification and the interest from business, is it not therefore important that any kind of reporting or labelling system that we implement should reflect the kind of basket of greenhouse gases rather than just the soil carbon component? And with that in mind, that there are some quite well-developed standards in existence already. So, you know, the UK developed PAS 2050, and from that derived an ISO standard and also the global carbon standards. So, you know, is the idea to kind of refine these existing standards or to create something completely new?
Yes, thank you, Luke. So first, I fully agree with you. Any verification or monitoring system should cover the full basket of greenhouse gases. Otherwise, it's nonsense in terms of mitigation. And second, I'd just like to clarify something, which is, well, even with some of the best practices in Europe, what you get after 5 years is an increase in your soil carbon stock by, say, 1% or maybe 2%. That's extremely small. You're not going to detect it with the classical way farmers or farm advisors are sampling their soils. It's not detectable. So we are not, we renew the approach here, and we are not looking in the changes in stocks, although this can be extremely important to measure after 10 years. But before those 10 years, we are looking into the balance of inputs and outputs of carbon in your soils. So that's where we get remote sensing to get an understanding of how much the vegetation is growing, how much carbon does it leave in the soil. And that's where you need to combine it with modeling to understand how much of that carbon stays in the soil after some years. When you do have some good tests of those methods, and that's happening now, we can really get a good accuracy. We show that at least in some sort of test region in France, with in southwest France on 100 by 100 kilometers, we believe the accuracy to be 30% of the change in stock after 5 years. But it can be improved. It's just current state of the art. So that's where we see potential to really upscale this at a global scale. We believe we could have a sort of tier, well, I don't know, for IPCC, it could sound like tier 3 because it's modeling, but we could have a sort of default approach that would be for the globe, because remote sensing covers everything. And then obviously each country, each corporate may want to do better, and certainly there would be scope to improve it a lot. Thank you. So I think Pamela, I think we are done with my section, unless there are some other questions or comments. Thanks, Heidi, for the reference to the grassland biomass remote sensing.
I was just checking the chat and the participants to see if any hands were up, but I think you're right. As I understand, that Pierre Gervas, I think, he was going to be coming on the top of the hour. And so we have sort of 10 minutes to have some conversation. But the other thing that I could share are the polls from our participants and interests from the registration. Okay.
Excellent. Thank you, Pamela.
Let me just pull that up. Yeah, Pierre had a conflict in the end, so he'll be joining us just a little later. Where's my share screen? Oh, Deborah, you have to let me use the screen, or one of the other hosts. It's because I went out and came back in again, I think, was the problem. Or I did send it to you yesterday, Jean-Francois, if you can pull it out. Oh, here she's letting me.
Yes, I can, yeah.
No, it's okay. It's actually coming now. Yeah, she
Good.
Let me go. All right. Yeah, so just this is a bit of in preparation for our discussions later, and just to get a sense of who's in the room and who's involved, I guess, in our IRG meeting this year. And from the 64 different registrants, I was actually quite pleased to see the distribution of regions. So it's a little bit more grouped, I guess, than the farms to regions when they did their survey had a little bit more refinement. But I think in a general sense, this gives us an idea of where people are coming from. And I think maybe of more interest is what are the main things that people are hoping to get out of this meeting, but also their participation in the IRG in general. And this is to sort of kickstart some discussions. It was great to see that learning about work in other countries was top of mind for many people. This is kind of reinforced that it was good to have those country reports and hear what the different countries are doing. Broadening our personal networks of contacts, people doing the same work, and it's very helpful, I think, and even through the chat here today, seeing where there might be some connections that could be made. Looking for opportunities for collaboration and funding of projects. It's great to see as people are either in the country reports, in the networks and the projects presented today, understanding where some of the different funding opportunities are, and continuing to promote when they become available is kind of key, and ahead of them being announced whenever we can. And part of the discussion, I guess, and what we wanted to talk about a bit today, and when Pierre is able to join us as well, is how to strengthen our science to policy connections and to enhance the impact of research. I think the projects the network presentations, but also the projects this morning were really emphasizing this connection to sort of needs of the government, whether that's in inventories and NDC work, you know, evidence-based was the term Cynthia used for making these decisions. You know, how can we use models to do that? So those are, you know, I think if there are any gaps or specific impacts we can make on those, that'll be a key part of our discussion. This is less, the opportunities for publication, data models, sharing data was a bit less for this group. That's not surprising. I think when we look at other research groups, they're very focused, and we had some folks, you know, were around livestock and crops, whatnot. And as we move to this sort of systems approach, you know, it's using those publications, using those research projects, and it's interesting to see. It's still important, I think, in the evidence base for everything to have opportunity for publications, and we are a research group. But just to kind of put in perspective what this current group participating, sort of their drivers for their interest in things are, and that I think helps us to frame our discussions and work planning. That's all I was going to share, just those two. There you go.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Pamela. And we are really timely because I think we are now joined by Pierre Gervas. And before I introduce you, Pierre, I would like to say that we are really glad to have you today, because we would like to understand more how this group from the IRG can make a difference in terms of also science to policy dialogue, and contributing to the knowledge base that is used in large projects, such as the projects developed and funded by the World Bank, often in collaboration with some other agencies like the FAO. So with this, I'd like to introduce you, Pierre. You are a senior livestock specialist at the World Bank. I think you are also a special professor at Wageningen University. And it's really nice to have you, because you know well the GRA. You've been already contributing to some of the GRA activities. And I think you will help us understand more about this science to policy interface, but more from the livestock perspective. So to you, Pierre.
Thank you, Jean-Francois. Good morning and good afternoon to all. It's a pleasure to be here, and sorry for joining late. I was in a meeting that I needed to attend. Yeah, so thanks for the introduction. It's good. I see many names I know, even names with whom I was in a meeting earlier today. So it's a great group. Yeah, I mean, currently my work splits into two areas. One, I'm based in Zagreb, and I cover Europe and Central Asia for the World Bank and the livestock portfolio. So we have a few large operations in the livestock sector. One, namely in Kazakhstan, it's a large operation, $500 million, and for the first time in that operation, for the first time at least for an operation funded by the World Bank, we are trying to increase the volume of production while reducing the absolute volume of emissions. So it's not only an emission intensity based approach, it's also not being carbon neutral, but it's increasing the output while reducing the overall emissions. So it's quite exciting, and that actually was the meeting I was into. The meeting I was just in at the moment was about that, and discussing with the ministry what it means in terms of extension and so on, and making it happen. So those are the kind of things we do. And for the other part of my portfolio, I work on global issues related to livestock portfolio at the bank, and mostly climate and environmental sustainability question. And what I'm going to present now is essentially, if I manage to do so, it's essentially, do you see my screen? Okay, I'm going to put it. That doesn't work. Is essentially the result from this global work and the report that we launched recently on the use of climate finance or the mobilization of climate finance in the livestock sector. So that's part of this work. It's not completely tailored to this group, but I'm happy then in the discussion to maybe take some questions and some points that are more directly related to the work of. Do you see it well? Yeah, it's full screen. Huh? So why did we start this work? It holds in 3 figures, fairly old ones, but still probably valid to a large extent. This estimation of the contribution of livestock value chains to global anthropogenic emissions, the fact that we have practices already known that could lead us to a 30% reduction, more or less, maintaining the output constant. But the fact that compared to those numbers are quite significant, it's less than 1% and much less than 1% of climate finance that is currently reaching livestock. It's also small for agriculture compared to energy and transport and others and buildings, but it's particularly small for livestock. So, and that's just to hammer down again that we have, and that work is coming from GRA really, and updated here through an interview with Hayden. So I don't need to go in too many details here, but we have a kind of a spectrum of practices that are for some already available, implementable, to those that are hopefully coming down the line through research and further discovery for mitigation. So it's a kind of a good basket of things we can do now, but also probably scope for pushing kind of this envelope, if you want, of the technical mitigation potential in the sector. And I'm not mentioning it here, but the report also, of course, mentions aspects related to consumption. So, of course, the overall production of the sector. But given the fact that we don't see much space at the moment for climate finance to tailor or to have an effect on consumption, except through price, we don't have kind of specific opportunities there for climate financing. It's not missed in the report, so I just want to highlight. So why do we have so little climate finance coming to the livestock sector? And we identified 3 groups of obstacles. And some of those obstacles are really related to livestock, some they cut across for various agricultural sectors. The 3 green ones there, they relate to livestock and agriculture in particular. So it's the high cost of servicing smallholders, and because they are spread out, because each one is of course small, but the transaction costs are incompressible, if you want, to a certain extent. So it comes to a high cost of servicing for the financial institution with these clients. The second is the highly perceived risk for climate finance and climate institutions to work in the ag space. And the third one is the fact that we have very long value chains in the sector. They cut across landscapes, country boundaries, and maybe regions and continents. And the pricing, the transmission of the price signal for what could be, sold with a premium for low environmental impact to a consumer to the producer upstream of soybean, for example, or any wheat and maize, is at the moment really not working very well. So this transmission of the price signal is not very strong in the sector. So that's one first basket. The second is about things that you know very well: lack of data, lack of MRV. It's important, but I don't go into details because you know it. And the third one is related to really the perception, the story, the sense of urgency on working on livestock compared to working on other sectors, right? And the fact that this risk that associates together with an environmental risk, animal welfare risk, ethic risk, or ethic perceptions, diet, etc., make it difficult for impact finance, climate finance, to really consider livestock as a valid partner in this work. All right. So This next slide here is to show that when we say climate finance, it's two words, but actually it's a huge diversity of sources, actors, from private to public, various flows, which can be country to country, related to corporate social responsibility, hardcore carbon markets, etc., etc. So there's still many flows there, and of course a multiplicity of recipients and types of mitigation that may be supported. So we're talking about something that is, and it is also very much in evolution still. So it is, we have to consider all that kind of space and those options to see where we have the best channels to reach mitigation actions down there effectively. Okay. With this slide, I would like to emphasize that, okay, with this report, we really try to push and understand what can be done in that narrow space of climate finance and livestock. Of course, we recognize that livestock is multiple, right? And that these opportunities will be very different for different systems and the stakeholders associated with these systems. And also recognize clearly that it is not only about mitigation, and it is there is first a very objective reason that intervention for mitigation would have effects on many other aspects of the systems and the mix of goods and services they produce, and other outcome we want from livestock in terms of equity, in terms of gender, food security, etc. So that's the first thing. And the second, we also know that if we try to sell climate finance product in the livestock sector only on the mitigation, we will always be, for the reason above, we will be less competitive than other sectors such as energy and transport, which have fairly clear ways of reporting and sometimes also very effective ways of mitigating emissions. So we also, from that perspective, need to rely on a broader rationale, if you want, to attract climate finance. Yeah. So based on that, and to come to something practical that we could start implementing, we identified 6 investment opportunities in the report. I'll go through them quickly. The first one is this idea of conditional lines of credit. In essence, you make asset. We know that a number of mitigation approaches generate also productivity gains, efficiency gains, so they will generate, in most cases, also better incomes for the farmers. So it makes sense to invest in those, right? So the idea here is let's ease access to credit, let's ease the farmers' capacity to invest in these practices in exchange for certain practices that they would implement on the farms to achieve emission reduction. So we have to think about mitigation conditions, and we have to think about what it means to ease access to credit, right? It's a question of technical assistance, a question of interest rate, a question also of collateral, de-risking investment, etc. The second approach is this value chain finance, coming back to what was said before, that there is little transmission of the price signal. And here, by really working with stronger traceability systems, see how we can, in fact, make that kind of price signal really penetrate and go upstream into the primary production of this value chain. It is particularly important for livestock. The third option we investigated is for emission trading schemes where they exist, and the capacity of livestock to contribute to those emission trading schemes, either under the cap, which is not really likely, but also possibly as a provider of offsets to those sectors under the cap. And that's, for example, something we're exploring now in Kazakhstan. Clearly a very important point on the MRV here, which is MRV is cutting across, but particularly important here because suddenly you are coming into a space where you have hard emissions from, for example, fossil fuel, and we're trying to offset that with emissions from livestock, where we have questions of reversibility, permanence, etc., etc. So strong point on MRV here. The fourth is an approach which has been developed already since some time. It's called verified sourcing areas, and here we would apply it especially to livestock feed. And here the idea is so that is an agreement which is made for a whole territorial unit, if you want, for the implementation of certain practices in that space, and those practices in particular prevent land use changes and deforestation and land degradation. And here the idea for the livestock sector is really to, as we try to improve feed rations as an important pathway for methane, for example, enteric methane emission reduction, not push emissions into land use change, so they're not having a displacement of emissions. The fifth is price-based incentive programs to push, as mentioned before, to push the envelope, to push the knowledge in terms of mitigation practices and breakthrough. At the moment, there is little investment in that, and if there is little investment in that, is because the returns on investment, whether you talk about public or private research, are perceived to be very distant and uncertain. And through this program, we would try to reverse that. This price-based incentive program, like AgResult, for example, exists and have been deployed a lot in the area of animal health, and for example, developing vaccines that are thermostable, etc. So it could be certainly replicated. But here, for example, the discussion with a group like the GRA would be on which topic do we need to develop that? Where are we close to a breakthrough, and where this kind of instrument could help going over? And the last one, which is relates a lot to the kind of work that we do at the World Bank, but also that ODA, so country to country development programs, is to make these programs, this support, conditional to some policy changes that create the conditions for innovation and private sector investment in climate sensitive technology, right? So, for example, here in this program I mentioned about Kazakhstan, the support is one of the conditions to the support is that the public subsidy program, the public support program to beef producer in Kazakhstan is revised and made conditional to the adoption of certain practices that will lead to emission reduction. So that's the kind of thing we're talking about here. Really change some structural elements of policies, so you're getting the large-scale adoption of the practice. That is it. Those are the 6. They may be combined. There will be others. At the moment, we are working particularly on 2, number 1 and number 2. Number 1 in Kenya. We are supporting together with colleagues at UNIC the formulation of such credit line for the dairy sector in Kenya. And number 2, we're working with the colleagues at the IFC, which is the arm of the World Bank, working with the private sector in Colombia on a deal there. That's it for the presentation. Happy to exchange on that.
Thank you so much, Pierre. It's really impressive to see how this becomes so really complex when you look at how you can really implement the changes. So I think that's really nice. We got questions in the chat. So there is one more technical question you may want to just talk with Hazel about with whom you're working in the Kazakhstan project. But now we have a big question from Pete. So please, Pete, if you like to express your views. Questions?
Yeah, sure. Great talk, Pierre, and great to hear this work going on. But I think World Bank still funds some fairly large-scale industrial livestock farming. So I was just wondering how much climate change is mainstreamed in decision-making. Obviously, climate change is one thing that World Bank has to consider. economic development, social development, and all those things or other things, how much is climate change considered mainstreamed in the decision making? And is it that you can still get projects supported by the World Bank that are not very good for climate change?
Yeah, so I don't think we fund large industrial livestock farming, to take your terms. I really don't think so. I mean, the entry point for our investment, kind of the basic rationale, will be, you know, this poverty eradication, food security, right? So I don't, and I know the portfolio, so I can tell you we don't have. There have been questions on investments supported by IFC, so it's World Bank Group, it's that arm working with the private sector. There have been questions, I think, especially for investment in Argentina, which were supporting a company which was in fact having large-scale operation, I think, in the beef sector. This has raised attention also within the teams, right? And we work closely together because indeed what is done by FC impacts what we do at IRBRD, and we are now developing guidelines to avoid that in the future. And I'm not sure if this project has been dropped or not, but so that was the one case where I would say, yes, there was support with this kind of. Now, in Kazakhstan, for example, to talk about a project I know, we work with smallholders and individual kind of mid-size beef producers, which will eventually send their animals to some feedlots, right? So there is an element of large scale, right, and finishing. But I would also argue that it may make sense if it's a good way to also make use of the vast rangelands that they have, and if we put emphasis on supporting the fact that those smallholders and individual farms are managing the land properly, are making, for example, sure that wintering is going well and we don't lose a lot of production in winter, which is loss emission, if you want. I think this works as a system, right? So that would be kind of the lengthy answer I will present here. Now, definitely, I don't think I would say the set of tools that we have to formulate and frame projects is improving really from month to month, right? So we do 4 things. We have a risk assessment for climate change impact on the operation, so a look at resilience. We estimate ex ante the GHG impact of the operation. Okay. We use the result from this ex ante, which is done using tools like Exact or Gleam or Cool Farm tool, right? We use the result of that analysis in the economic and financial assessment of the operation with a shadow cost for emissions, right? So we have different scenario and we test that. There's a lot of assumption, but it is included in EFA, economic and financial assessment. And the 4th thing we do is to map out of the overall budget of the program, how much is generating also positive outcome for resilience and for mitigation. So your project cost $100 million, and 10 million go into improving rations of animals, right? And manure management. So that is a 10% co-benefit, 10 on the total of the million, 10% co-benefit for climate. Right? And you look at it, so there is a whole method. I'm happy to share that on how we do this mapping. So those are the things we do, and the more that I see them, so the more it goes, the more precise we are in the use the tool we use, Gleam and Exact and so on are being refined. We're also more and more ambitious with the targets. So these co-benefit targets were at 20%, 28%. They're now at 35%, and they're going to raise, I hear, to 50 or 60%. But that's all ex ante. And you may say, well, what do? Do you come back on it? And I think that's the next step we're going to see. We're going to see that we will have ex post and kind of mandatory indicators in the result framework of this operation to make sure that these things are really happening. But I can tell you that with the change of administration in the US, the attention to climate issues has been substantially raised. So yeah. But Pete, I mean, I also don't pretend that this is all perfect, and I mean, making it happen is still extremely difficult, and you know, because immediately you go into very old issues around extension, around access to resources, around data management, and about making sure that environment talks to agriculture and they share the data and the statistic, that your livestock operation is linked to target that you find in the NDC. I mean, you name it. And so those are still, I think, parts that are still working for us. Sorry, it was a long answer.
Thank you, Pierre. I think we have at least one question from Ngoni about the vaccination, but maybe let me try to put this in a sort of a broader context. And I think you alluded to this when you said what are the impacts on other SDGs and so on. So I think what you're describing could be also explicitly connected to other issues. Like the first one, after listening at Cynthia, is can we deliver co-benefits for mitigation and adaptation? This would be one question to you. Can we have this in the design? But going back to Ngoni's questions, there is a One Health dimension. We are in a pandemic that is caused by zoonotic disease, and preventing those zoonotic diseases could be seen as really key to a sustainable future. So how can we develop livestock while contributing to the prevention of zoonotic spread? You know, that could be one question. And still there is the last one, which is about food security. Not everyone is equal, if I may say. Some categories in the local population may deserve to eat more meat because it extremely they have very low amounts of meat and milk products, and so they would benefit possibly of having more. But others possibly they just overconsume some of those products. So in those interventions in the livestock sector, how could you consider also maximizing co-benefits for these three dimensions, which are adaptation to climate change, food security, and One Health? Very ambitious question. Sorry, Pierre.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I cannot really answer all that, but just let me say, I copy a link to the report in the chat there. So if you want to take a look,
yeah, thank you. That's great. Thank you.
Sorry, I should have put that on the slide. So the co-benefits. At the moment, I mean, I can just say how we map them in these operations. I mean, I don't see, honestly, I don't. So in terms of approaches, I don't see necessarily a divide between adaptation, resilience, and mitigation, right? Because if your herd collapses every 5 years when you're in East or West Africa, it's a problem for both mitigation and for adaptation and resilience. So it's a question really of time frame at which we look at those things. So in many cases, I don't think there is necessarily a competition between the two. Maybe if you look at one animal on a very short timeline, then maybe, yes, you find them. But as soon as you increase the scope, I'm not sure there is so much. And okay, then I don't want to go into too many details, but we map those co-benefits I mentioned with a very kind of a standardized protocol which cuts across all sectors. But we have activities. If you tick those activities, you can pretend that you have mitigated. So they relate to manure management, to feeding, to some aspects of health. Again, it's a method that is common to all the multilateral development banks. For resilience and adaptation, it's not that clear, I must say, but it's based on the rationale. So you have the team has to explain what were the bottlenecks that were identified to improving resilience and adaptation, and how they were addressed in the design of the project, through which activities, and how they are measured in the result format. And then you can quantify your resilience. We call adaptation for benefits. Again, if you're interested, I'll come back on that. On zoonoses, yeah, frankly, you know, in this group there are people who are much more familiar than me. I mean, on that, so I don't want to go too deep. Definitely around. I mean, there's no need to repeat that on health improvement and health control. There is a very strong synergy with adaptation and mitigation. That is quite clear. It's related to efficiency. It's related to the resilience of the animals to go over drought and so on. What I can tell that the One Health approach is getting a lot of traction at the World Bank. That is definitely the case. We're implementing now a large trust fund with a contribution from Germany to really improve that. It's the concept of animal, human, and environmental health is very compelling and it's very strong. But there again, its implementation is very difficult. So in the way we do it at the moment, we're trying to start from an issue. For example, there is a large program in West Africa called ReadySay. It starts from Ebola and then proposes an answer to that issue that builds on the One Health principle. So in that case, it will be a lot of human health entry points, 80%, and the rest will be bringing it into the picture. Maybe in ECA, we are looking also at opportunity to have also a project. There, the entry point will be zoonosis. So then we will mobilize the One Health approach, but more from, if you want, a livestock entry point. Yeah, so the way we use it at the moment is as kind of a very effective way to address issues we observe or that are really pressing in certain region, more than rolling out the concept itself in abstraction of local issues. Now on consumption, I think honestly that's where we can still make some improvement. I think the bank responds to a demand, a letter from the country asking for support in a certain area, and if the letter talks about livestock, well, we will look at that. We'll look at broadly. We look at different species. We look at different systems and so on. But I think initiating the dialogue with the clients on the food system, right, and how it relates to a land use base, how it relates to certain impacts, how it relates to diet. So elevate a little bit the thinking is something we are going towards, I think, and in fact we're starting having some discussion. It is, as you can, I mean, it is of course much more complex, but I see it coming.
Great, fantastic. So I think we have one more question from Lee. Maybe Ngoni, if you like first to ask your question about vaccination.
So what's the question?
Sorry, I think it was a question earlier from Ngoni.
Francois. So
please go on, yeah. Oh, we have maybe a technical problem. We cannot hear you, Ngoni.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thanks, Pierre, for the great presentation. I just wanted to ask, I mean, at some point you talked about vaccines and that it was still around the discovery stage. So I was just thinking that with this global efforts around COVID, is it possible to use the increased capacity that we have at the global stage in livestock vaccines, or are they completely separate?
Well, that's an interesting question, but I mean, here I see Hayden and people who can really better answer than me this question. I would be interested to know. I have no idea, but I mean, what it shows is that if there is a strong push, we can do things that are quite amazing, impressive in terms of technology development, right? So I'm not going to too many details, but and that's it's a little bit what we hide behind that activity number 5, right? The price-based research, right? To say, well, if we see a technical block at the moment that being removed would allow us to really expand the mitigation and change really the deal of options we have in the sector. Well, maybe some people are ready to put the resources behind to have this breakthrough, right? So that's the intention behind this opportunity, which is pretty much in line with what we said. Whether that applies to the vaccine sector, I'm not entirely sure. We discussed with Hayden sometime because I wanted to know if we could put vaccination, in fact, on that opportunity, but Hayden was not so sure that. I mean, he said, I think the level of the prize, the size of the prize would have to be substantial. Hayden, you want to comment? Yeah, raise your hand.
Yes, briefly, because we don't have much time now. We need to move to breakouts. But please,
not an expert in vaccines at all. But this question was asked at a conference recently where experts responded, and the answer was something along the lines of that. While there has been significant progress in the COVID vaccine development, the way the vaccine operates, or at least the way that the vaccine for methane in livestock has been developed, is a very different pathway. The vaccine for methane is actually trying to trigger a response in the saliva of the animal to act on the methanogens in the rumen, which is quite different to the way a COVID vaccine would target the virus. So there may be some relevance, but it's not a direct benefit that you might hope.
Thanks, Hayden. So I think we will have to stop there. Thanks so much, Pierre. This was really impressive and very interesting. And you may want to answer Lee on the chat about artificial meat if you like. Yeah. And now I think we need to move on to the breakouts. So we could have 2 breakouts because we are not such a large group. And you have 3 questions that were sent. And given the short time we have, we would like to focus on question D and F. Question D is basically how could we have more impact and communicate better? And question F is what would you like to see in the work plan of the IRG that is not yet there? And especially because yesterday we discussed about how can we better integrate. Please have a think about how we could also better integrate in our future work plan. So thank you so much, and I think we will be magically shifted by Deb to the breakouts.
though maybe.
So it was a bit tough to keep in time, I think. But,
well, I wasn't sure. I just said we're going to get a warning, a 1-minute warning, and it worked well this time. Thanks. I saw the countdown.
oh yeah, excellent. Okay, so would you like to report first, Pamela, from your group, or is someone else reporting from your group?
Well, when we were leaving, I said I would report, but then I remembered Nina was okay. I will report for our group. Yeah, I think there was a couple ideas, I guess ideas for sharing in particular. The sharing of protocols and best practices, and I guess sharing not just on the technical side, but also on experiences with engaging adopters, but also engaging the policy group. And the idea that we can share some of our best practices on how we're engaging policy and or engaging farmers, but also the GRA has the power to convene and help support dialogues that might be needed between science and policy connects. It was interesting, the thought that, probably the policy needs, at least from a greenhouse gas perspective, are probably fairly common globally, and maybe we can, narrow in on those. I mean, if we're going to define those, if they're sort of familiar, but then each country is going to have their own needs to adjust those with the other priorities, whether that's around sustainable development goals, water security, biodiversity, kind of depending what their needs are. The other one, a couple other ideas, yeah, is that we sort of need to, there's the needs of the policymakers, where we have sort of the INDC working at that sort of level, but then we also need to sort of understand the adoption and promoting that at the farm level, and maybe the farm to regional scale group, and some of the economics there might be a good venue for that. Both of them needing this MRV, and so at the farm level, how can we do better accounting? Are there protocols for what the farmers are actually doing that they can kind of contribute and share that they're doing good practices, as well as sort of that global MRV, so remote sensing approach. So it's recognizing these different scales, and we can probably contribute at different scales. And was there something else? Yeah, just sort of identifying point people, I guess, whether in projects for sort of stakeholders or farmers in terms of a liaison. The idea of either they're coaches, so experts within a country, or experts that are working on engagement, so that they can be a point of contact when people have questions about how to do things. And our other challenge of sort of doing this at a landscape scale, when balancing carbon sinks and sources and capturing nitrous oxide emissions, that moving from the farm to sort of those other components of forestry, wetlands, hedgerows, that sort of thing. So we had a broad range, but those were some of the topics we discussed.
Yes, that's great. Thank you, Pamela. So I think we didn't organize ourselves very well, so I'm going to try to report from our breakout. And basically, we spent some time, and we had interesting suggestions on the communication side, and on the way we could improve our impact through communication. So this came, sorry, I have problem finding my notes. Why? Oh yeah. There it is. Yes, we could see that on the one hand, we heard from Pierre at the World Bank that they still need some sort of high-level views on how the agricultural systems could be transformed, what is required, but they also need a lot of capacity building and a lot of training. So a variety of things could be used. Capacity building is really a clear, I think, activity inside the GRA. So I think we can channel to this type of activities, the demand. Some online courses would be interesting. And this is also something where we could possibly link with others, because we have online courses in several universities contributing to the GRA. But then we asked, should we just create policy briefs for the big events like COP26 and so on? And some said this is maybe not the way to work it out. What you need is really to engage the policymakers, the stakeholders, and to engage them, you have different things you could do. You could ask for their opinions. You could ask for their opinions on the newsletters that we have produced. That's one thing. You could also ask directly what they need. So we could ask them what sort of knowledge would you like to see, and on which points would you like to really have a debate, a policy debate supported by knowledge. And moreover, we heard from Katja especially that policy briefs are not enough. You need to have various channels fitting to the ways, diverse ways people digest information. And then we thought, okay, maybe to do more, we would need specific funding. And we thought that indeed some of the foundations are really interested in engaging policymakers in some new thinking. And possibly we could approach some foundations to get funding on new ways of communicating with policymakers, especially. For instance, I mentioned serious games. You can have games where actually you have stakeholders playing, but they are playing with a knowledge base that is in the game that can be quite advanced. It could be through modeling or whatever. So we could maybe have a project constructed across the GRA networks that would seek these new communication channels with the policymakers with specific funding. So I think that's where we stopped, because we didn't have enough time. Thank you. Any comment from participants in the breakout, or no? No, it's okay.
Can I comment if anybody can hear me?
Yes, sure.
Good. I'm back. Yeah, just the comment on the participating directly with policymakers. I guess the issue there is policy's not developed like science. It's often happens very sporadically and very quickly, and often engaging with the people who have the answers, and often the people who have the answers are not the right people, and often not the scientists. I'll give you an example of that. In Australia, the soil carbon question is one where there's a lot of funding going into it, and I'm not suggesting for a second that there shouldn't be, but in preference to a lot of other areas where in this country you could potentially have more gains. And what's happening and what's driving it is that the people that are talking to the politicians that are at the forefront, it's not the scientists, and it's not even necessarily the policymakers. It's the sellers. It's the people that are selling the solutions, as it were, and they're not necessarily scientific solutions. And so how do you compete with that, I think, is a big problem that organizations like the GRA need to grapple with. There's just a comment there.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Lee. I think there is nothing simple, and we all know this drive that there will be a special view by some or a special legislative process, and within just a few weeks it may change the landscape, and maybe it's very difficult to get the knowledge base through at that time. And we have a big debate in France on how do we assess the impact of laws. This is not well done, I think, in many countries. So well, there are still other things, but I think it's something to understand. Yeah, so thank you. I think we could maybe approach foundations to develop our impact and create some new communication channels. That may be something we could consider. And I think we got a few comments in the chat. So maybe let's go back to this. So I think we heard from Lee.
Jean-Francois, sorry, we did actually have 3 breakout groups. So
Oh yeah, okay, I didn't realize. I'm sorry. So please, who is the third group?
who was reported back?
Hi, Deb, it's Hazel. I can report back for our group.
Oh, excellent. Thank you, Hazel.
So we talked in large part about much of the things that have already been reported back by the 2 other breakout groups. Our discussion did centre around communicating some of the more technical details of the science in a way that is digestible and usable for policymakers and in policy. So we talked a little bit about what kind of format that might be in, but Claudia also pointed out that obviously in developed countries, this is all well and good to move about it in this kind of structure, but in developing countries, there's often far less research and also far less capability to even get to this stage of the communication process. So it's a little bit different. And obviously policymakers often don't have the time to delve into understanding the technical details. It's often quite a mad scramble to get anything into policy. Maybe even half a day might be the time frame that you're working to. So the policy brief or communication does need to be tailored for that and tailored for the end user. Yeah, I might have missed some things, but Hayden, please feel free to add, or anyone else from our group.
Thank you, Hazel. Yeah, very good. Thank you. So I think we are. Oh, Luke, please. Would you like to speak?
Well, it was just to say that within the context of what Hazel's very clearly set out, it was sort of an observation really that the Integrative Research Group arose from 2 kind of cross-cutting activities, and that there may be still a bit of a need within the Alliance to have that kind of horizontal cross-cutting perspective over the work that's being done vertically, if you like, within the individual research groups. Now, I know that in practice, this group tends to focus quite a lot on kind of soil carbon modelling and inventory, but there is something about kind of how we pull together our messages coherently across the work of the Alliance.
Yeah, thank you. So I think you're pointing to this in terms of impact and communication, isn't it? Yeah, sure. Yes, so we should not, if we create a special effort on this, we should work with other working groups, research groups. Yeah, I fully agree. Yeah. Very good. So I think with this, we are coming to the end of this session. I think it was really very interesting. Thank you so much to the presenters, and thank you for your inputs all. We are left with big possibilities ahead for next year's work. We see that each network is really with a large avenue, I would say, and certainly we could hear this from not only the networks but also from the projects, like the MACB project has a lot of potential to work in many world regions. Certainly in Europe, we have a bit of similar things with the Maxer, as you know, since so that's a good possibility to collaborate. Certainly, we see that there is a huge importance of developing the inventories and NDCs. And so, yeah, I think it could benefit from more funding and from more support, and hopefully there will be some more support. And the same is for soil carbon with the IRC. Hopefully it will be an important initiative, well connected to the GRA. And we also see the circular economy concept that is really strong and coming with many questions and a lot of potential for integrating. And the farm scale was a bit underdeveloped, frankly speaking. So now it's coming and can integrate also. So we get this very rich landscape, and if we can better move this also at the GRA scale with a sense of how we can deliver those integrative findings and engage the stakeholders, I think we will do still some more progress. But with this, I would like to thank especially Pamela, because with Deb and others, you did a lot of work for organizing those sessions, and Lee for also helping us in designing this. And we certainly look forward to keep in touch with all of you. And in case you can see some colleagues that would like to work in each of the in some of the networks, please let us know, and we will point them to the network leaders, and we hope these networks will further grow. So thank you.
I was just going to add, Jean-Francois, that I think some of our next steps as the IRG co-chairs and working with the network co-leads as well, is to kind of look at the input that
indeed. Thank you.
we received from the group, and I think capturing what the networks are already doing, and you know, we heard some good things, and just being able to communicate that back to the council so they can see the wealth and of activity going on, but then also identify some of the gaps that people have identified, and see if we can take one or two of those to kind of advance this year as we can, and even just keeping some of these ideas as holding ideas for future work too. But
yeah, sure. Yes, thank you, Pamela. This would be an important next step indeed. Yeah. So thank you all, and hope to see you one of those days in presential. That would be great.
Well, are you welcoming people to stay on for a little virtual chat as our
yes,
grab a coffee or
right.
a wine or whatever?
We can have a drink together if you like. So for those of you who have a bit time.
We miss you.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Well, so the formal part is over, I guess, is what Jean-Francois is saying. The formal part is over.
A glass of water,
thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you'd like to hang on, that is one fine too.